Welcome to Crust Issues. I'm your host, Ryan Naseda, and today I'm delighted to sit down with Jennifer Hahn, the creative force behind Lune Specialty Desserts, a cottage bakery nestled in Grand Rapids' Creston neighborhood. As you'll see, Jen's path to the pastry world is anything but typical, with unexpected turns and profound personal experiences shaping her unique approach to baking. In this episode, she shares the stories, insights, and influences that brought her where she is today. Join us for the warm, inspiring conversation about resilience, creativity, and the sweet and sometimes salty side of life. Hi, Jen. Welcome to Crust Issues.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So to get started, can you introduce yourself a little bit and share a little bit about what you do?
My name is Jen, and I am the owner and pastry chef of Lune Specialty Desserts. It's a cottage bakery here in the Creston area of Grand Rapids. Originally, I got my degree and my bachelor's degree from Grand Valley in French, and didn't expect to end up in the culinary world, but my winding path led me to culinary school, and I ended up working for a few bakeries, cafes, and decided to start my own cottage bakery with the hopes of taking it a little bit further. So that's where I am at right now.
What are some of your earliest memories of baking?
So my earliest memory of baking was asking my mom for an easy bake oven, and she was like, you can use the real oven. And I think honestly, that's probably the biggest influence in my baking journey, is just that idea of don't take the easy way out. Yeah. And so from an early age, if I wanted to bake, it was use the oven, get a cookbook, use the oven. As I've gone through life and had different journeys, passions, directions, baking has always been a constant for me. So it's just always something I would gravitate to as a hobby. Never got that easy bake oven.
I think you're better off.
Yeah, I think so too.
Your cookies aren't as mushy. Was there a specific moment when you knew baking was going to be more than just a hobby for you?
I had been trying to find my way in life. After graduation, I went to France and I was teaching over there for a little bit. I came back and I was doing French lessons, tutoring for the son of a restaurant owner, and was asked, hey, do you want to pick up some shift at our restaurant? So I was working as a server, moved up to bartending, and then started to watch in the kitchen and became friends with the chefs. And I started baking more at home, bringing in things for them to try. And at one point, the owner was like, you should spend some time with our bakers. You ever thought about culinary school? And I had never thought about baking as a profession, but I kept gravitating towards it. For me, it was a way to work through things, to take my energy and put it into something good. And I started baking with the bakers at that restaurant, started going to culinary school, and then got in the culinary program, the baking and pastry program at GRCC, and then it just took off from there. And then I decided, I could do this professionally. I would love to do this professionally.
It's interesting to hear about your path from, it being a hobby to...
Oh yeah. I started college pre-med. I was going to be a doctor. And so I have made so many different...
Transition.
Yes, it was 3 years pre-med. I was going to go to medical school, switch my major to French, and now came back, went to culinary school. I've done all these turnarounds. Baking has always been a constant. So to finally decide, this is what I want to do, it felt right. It felt really right.
Were there any specific moments when you knew baking was... Oh, I already asked that question, didn't I?
It's okay. You can cut that part.
Thank you. Maybe I'll leave it in now. Who were your biggest influences when you started baking? It sounds like your mom was a big influence.
My mom. Chef Will at GRCC, his passion for baking science, it just ignited this fire inside of me where I was like, baking is so much more than decorating or making things that taste good. There's a whole food science world that's just a never-ending exploration. It's so fun. It's amazing. It's inspiring. Chef Will's passion for food science really drove me to dive into this, not just as I want to bake and make great things. It was, I want to learn the whys. I want to understand why things are the way they are and transform things in ways that you normally wouldn't be able to, but having a science background with it. It's so great. It's so great. And so that was such a big influence for me. And I think I've definitely carried that into who I am as a baker, what kind of baker that I am, that passion for food science, for sure.
Yeah, I know you mentioned you're the Bill Nye.
I feel baking is precise. It's, what's the word I'm looking for?
Somebody compared cooking and baking to me, and cooking, you can change the ingredients. You can add a little extra salt, and it's not really going to make that big of a difference. But in baking, if you add an extra teaspoon of flour, that changes the entire
Right. Yeah.
like the science part of
Yeah,
it.
that's
It
true.
changes
Yes, it's very
everything.
scientific.
Yeah.
I think a good baker, though, can rely on food science and intuition. And there's like a marriage of that knowledge of science and then intuition that kind of come together. And just once you feel comfortable with it, it makes baking so much more fun. I think the excitement comes from, okay, if I am troubleshooting a recipe or someone comes to me and they're like, hey, Jen, okay, I made this salted caramel and I feel like it's not salty enough. What do I do? How much should I add? How many teaspoons? And I'm like, let's look at your recipe. Your salt should be about 0.2%. Is that where your salt is? And then we adjust from there. Or, oh, I want to make this a vanilla flavor. How do I do that? Okay, your vanilla should be about 1%. If you want more, let's adjust that way. It's all math. It's all science. I think that makes it really fun.
I know. It is really fun to be able to manipulate those things to, change a recipe. And like most of the baking I do is bread.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you definitely get it.
You understand when people say time is a ingredient.
Yes.
It definitely is an ingredient.
Gosh. Time, temperature,
Yeah.
percentages, like these things matter. And I think with bread too, you're like, hey, I adjusted the water 0.05%. But like that changes your bread. People look at you like you're crazy. And I'm like, okay, look, I've just made 20 loaves of bread in the past week, but each one has a different water content and the protein content of this. And then like, I thought you're baking. And you're like, I am baking.
I think people bake one thing, and if it doesn't turn out, they think they're not great bakers.
Right.
But what I've learned is that the more you touch the dough, the more your five senses are a part of it.
Oh, yeah.
When I bake bread, I can touch a piece of dough, and I could tell you if it's going to make a good loaf of bread or not.
Yeah, that's that intuition. You become more comfortable with what you're doing. Yeah, with me, same. I don't always have to look at or taste something to know what needs to be adjusted. My best friend, she's the pastry manager at one of my old jobs, and we talk all the time about recipes and troubleshooting. And so sometimes she'll send me a picture and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or sometimes she'll have me taste something. But even from pictures, I can troubleshoot just because you're looking. That's what kind of keeps the zest on. You're like, ooh, I'm like, okay, right, exactly.
Can you walk us through your journey? How did you go from baking at home to making a career? I know you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I can go a little more in depth about it. It's very winding. If that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It gets a little sad, but I promise there's a happy ending. When I was in college, I was pre-med. I wanted to be a neurologist, and my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. It had spread to his brain, so his time was pretty limited. And, my dad growing up, he was always like, what kind of doctor are you going to be? Like, it wasn't even, will you be a doctor? And when he decided to stop treatment, he had said to me, just do what makes you happy. Just be happy.
Aww.
And that was life-changing for me. And at the time, what was making me happy was my minor in French. And so I had changed my major to French, and I ended up getting really into that. I wanted to be a translator. And then I was diagnosed with a couple of things, intracranial hypertension, which caused a little bit of misalignment in my eyes.
Yeah.
So what basically that means is I had too much fluid in my brain. And so my eyesight was a little off. And sitting at a computer translating, it just wasn't going to be an option for me. And I had gone through treatment and things are a lot better with that. I still have a slight misalignment, but for the most part, I realized that sitting in front of a computer or reading all the time just wasn't going to be best for my physical health. Then I went over to France, and I had escaped a terrorist attack. There was the attack in Nice on Bastille Day. And the truck drove onto the promenade on the beach.
Oh, yeah,
I was there. I was running away from that, from my life. And yeah, when you have experienced that, nothing can faze you. Surviving that, I think, it was a lot. It was a lot with my dad's death, my diagnosis, and then I found out I had a pituitary tumor and it affected my health in so many ways, like hormonally. And so I was baking for almost like a trauma release. It was very helpful to me to take these feelings that I felt, bake, and it was almost like translation in a way. For me, translation has always been a passion of mine, taking something, turning it into something else with the same meaning or a different meaning, and just creating a message. And that's how baking was to me. I would take the stress, the trauma, the things that I was going through, and then I would channel them into baking in a very healthy way, and then make things that made people happy and brought people joy and brought me joy. And it just became such a part of who I was that when it was suggested to me, hey, you should go to culinary school, it made sense. And then after culinary school, I started working as a baker for the restaurant that I was working for originally. And it was a lot of baking off muffins, scones, cookies, not deviating from their recipes, which is fine. I think it's great when you're a beginner baker. It definitely taught me how to work in a commercial kitchen, how to be adaptable. We didn't have the same equipment as you did in culinary school. You had all the best in culinary school. And then we go to this other place and, the oven doesn't really work right. And it's like you have to adapt. And it really taught me how to adapt. So then I started working for another bakery. And I had also gotten into a car accident at the time. And my left shoulder was completely out of use. It was horrible. So while I was healing, I was also working as a baker, making hundreds of croissants every day. So that became pretty difficult, but I toughed through it. I was getting physical therapy, things like that. And then I had moved up a position into more of a pastry chef position. So I was making specialty desserts, managing other people, and my accident injury was getting worse. And it was a very defining moment for me because in my mind, I was going to go to Chicago. I was going to go learn from the best and go to California or wherever and just learn, and New York, and come back and be this like amazing pastry chef. And my osteopath was like, you have to make a decision. You're either going to do this career and have pain your whole life or take a step back and heal. And so I decided to take a step back, heal my body, and I started managing for this cafe I was baking at, and it was very hard on me. I always had that love for baking. I knew I would return. I healed from my car accident. I got myself where I needed to be, and then I assessed what are my limits. My limits are what I know is good for my body. Like I know not to push my body. So then I decided I'm going to do cottage bakery. I'm going to bake out of my house for a while, and then I will get commercial kitchen space and take my bakery as far as I physically can and as much as I can for my mental health. It's important not to stress yourself out too much doing what you love, because then you lose your love for it.
I think on our walk here, we talked a little bit about like the difference between baking at home and baking in a commercial kitchen.
Oh, it's worlds different.
When it's so different. It's at home, you can meditate, you can relax, you can enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And in a commercial bakery, it's very intense. And like you mentioned, like you made 100.
I was making hundreds of macarons, doing so many things at once. But at home, I guess the chaos doesn't really start until nighttime. So I feel like, because you want things to be fresh for people the next day, with the chaos of life going on, nighttime is when you get the calm and, the space. So I have my kitchen set up very close to a commercial kitchen. I have speed racks, I have the equipment. Yeah. And that's, I think, an advantage that I've had is working in the commercial kitchens. I know about food safety. I know about the best way to make large batches of things efficiently, limited by working in my kitchen, but also knowing how to navigate that is a lot of fun. And then the chaos is at home, but then I can take a break and I don't have to be on the clock for 8 hours. Yeah. I can work from 2 to 4 in the morning and then take a nap and then get up from 6 to 7. It's chaotic. But at least I get to be at home. I do enjoy that right now.
The short time I worked in a bakery was so valuable to me because there's never a time in my home kitchen where I'm going to be making 100 loaves of bread.
Right.
So being able to shape all those loaves and being able to shape different types of breads, essentially perfecting it.
Yeah, it's muscle memory. Something we learned in culinary school is if you want to learn how to do something well, do it 100 times. Like you have to train your muscles and your brain to do it. And working in a bakery like that, it helps you at home because then you can work faster. You can get more done. You're not stuck in your kitchen for too long.
Yeah, because bread, with bread, you try to leave your hands off it as much as you possibly can.
Yes. So you learn how to get it quickly, let it sit. Yeah. And it's nice doing it from home because then while your bread is rising, I have to work on this other part. You can spend some time with your kids or your wife or whatever.
It's great to hear about your experiences. And
it's been a journey for sure.
Sounds like a definite journey. Have you ever had a moment where you doubted the path you chose, and how did you push through that?
I think I've had a couple of moments. I've been asked to do some French tutoring or some French lessons for people, and that passion that I had for linguistics and French language really pulled me back in and made me think, am I doing the right thing? Should I be pursuing my original path? But then I picked up this book called The Linguist Reads the Menu, and I haven't finished it yet, but it's basically looking at the culinary world and the linguistic world together. And then
it's incredible. That's like all of your worlds coming together in one book.
So it gives me hope that, yes, I love the French language, but at the heart of it, I love language. I love linguistics. I love translation. And I think there's a way for me to bring all of that together I don't know how at the moment, but I think that it gives me more hope that no, I am doing the right thing. And there's a way for me to bring everything together.
And the French world of pastry is
right.
like...
It's nice to study recipes. I actually do have a little bit of a client base who are some former French professors, and I have been given recipes or asked to make something that I prefer to look at the recipe in French to make it more authentic to find it from like a French cookbook. That definitely helps a lot for sure. But also just the idea of, again, translation. It just really keeps the spark going for language as well as food.
Absolutely. What's your favorite thing to bake and why?
Oh, I think it's a tie between bread, any type of bread, just because of, I think, like that shaping it with your hands, like being very methodical, the excitement of, is it going to work? Like, is my kitchen warming up? Did I do it right? That, but also I think tarts. I love making tarts because you get the best of every part of it. You get to make your crust, and it's very, it's almost like bread. Like, you have to have your hydration right and your fat content right, and you have to not overwork the butter and the dough. And then you get to make a filling or a curd or a custard or something that takes multiple steps, and you can tweak it, and then you get to decorate it, which adds that like fun art aspect to it. And I think it's that all-encompassing thing. Definitely love making tarts.
That's great. Do you have a signature baked good and something that people know you for?
I do. That's what I brought for you today.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm excited to try them.
Brown butter miso chocolate chip cookies.
I should have tried them before the interview so I could tell people how amazing they are.
Oh, thank you. I want to preface this by saying I understand the love for gooey chocolate chip cookies. I think I get why people love them. Personally, I don't. I will offer them like for anybody who wants one. I have a good recipe for one. I love to eat like a crunchy chocolate chip cookie, a crunchy, salty chocolate chip cookie. So this came from my love of like salty, sweet, crunchy. So this cookie is made with browned butter that I take pretty far. It's pretty brown. So I make this brown butter and then I add miso paste to it. And so ultimately when you get this cookie, you get the crunch of the cookie. You get the dark chocolate, and then it's chewy, and then you get the salt. I put salt on top, and then you get umami. You get the miso. So it's this like multi-layered journey of taste buds. I love making it.
I'm excited to try them. I want to end the interview now so I can go.
We're going to take an intermission for
yeah, exactly.
I think it's really interesting. As a pastry chef, I actually don't eat a lot of sweets. I have a very big salt tooth. I love salt.
Yeah.
I get a headache if I eat too much sugar. So if I'm making something, I'm usually tasting it. But at the end of the day, it's my husband who gets to eat most of the things, or my friends, or my mom. I enjoy the process. It's not like I'm a big sweet eater.
I lean towards, I think why I lean more towards the breads personally is because I'm more of a savory, salty type person. I do enjoy a good cookie though.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Every now and then I'll really enjoy it, and then I'll go eat the 6 pieces of ciabatta that I made. Yeah.
How do you approach developing new recipes?
So I definitely have that like scientific approach, right? So I would look at a base recipe and then again go towards percentages. Okay, if I wanted to make this a coffee flavor, what percentage of instant coffee would I use, or would I use ground coffee in the milk, and how much percentage would I use in that? And then as I try a recipe, then I would adjust based off of percentages and also taste for sure. But I definitely look at it very methodically. And I think that helps save me a lot of time, because if I have a recipe that's blueberry and I want to make it strawberry, or I want to make it something else, it's adjustments, not trying to find a new recipe. So I always take a base recipe and then adjust from there.
I feel like a lot of like looking on the internet at different people's chocolate chip recipe, I feel like it's just the recipe on the back of the Toll House package and they just tweaked it a little bit to make it their own.
Yep, exactly.
Do you think I'm...
Oh yeah, totally. And you can actually, I think there's like a thing where you can actually just, as long as you adjust one tiny thing,
you can call it your
copy
recipe.
Someone else's recipe, which, oh my gosh, I think it's definitely saves me obviously time, but also money. I think food costs is something that I've definitely learned a lot about working for different bakeries. And then you have that mindset when you're at home. You're like, hey, if I'm going to try this recipe and it's not going to work, how can I limit my food costs? Do I start from scratch? Or do I take this recipe and adjust it a little bit? And so definitely saves me money, saves me time.
And I found it depends what you have in the pantry at your home too.
Yes, exactly.
And you're like, oh, I have this and this. I can, make that happen.
Oh yeah, there are times where I'm like up in the middle of the night. I'm like, I want to bake. I need to bake something. What am I going to bake? and I look and see what I have. Like, what do I need to use, especially if it comes
It's like reverse
seasonal or-
engineering.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I'll go to the farmer's market and I'll grab some like seasonal produce. I'm like, oh man, these, whatever, the blueberries are in season or rhubarb is in season. And then I'm like, oh, I need to use this. And then you reverse engineer, okay, if I do this and I can have this. And then then you're randomly up in the middle of the night making galettes because like, yes, I have to use, I only have this much butter. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That is fun. Baking is so precise. Do you see yourself more as an artist or a scientist in the kitchen? I know we've touched on that a little
Definitely
bit already.
scientist, but also there's an artistic aspect of it. And I think it's like when you take a deep breath and then you let it out. That like taking in of the deep breaths, that's how I feel when I'm using the science. I'm like inhaling, I'm thinking, I'm anticipating. And then when it comes to the final product, if I'm decorating, then I breathe out. And like,
I love that.
I can relax and just have fun with it. Or sometimes it's not fun and you're like, oh my God, this isn't turning out the way I wanted it to turn out. But it's definitely a learning curve, decoration and keeping up with trend and all that. And I definitely have fun with it. It's not my main passion for doing it, which I think some people, their main passion is the artistic aspect of it.
Yeah.
There's no judgment there at all.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Because I'm more of a taste forward.
Yeah.
Like it might not look as appealing as someone might want it to look. I went the extra mile to make sure it tastes good.
Right.
And like the decoration part of it, like you said, there's nothing against it. But it's not
my main factor.
Like even in bread, like scoring, I might score it a couple of times, but I don't I don't make like sunflowers and stuff like that.
Right. And it's nice if you're doing small scale, but then when you're doing a larger scale, you have to sacrifice some of that artisticness. And I think some bakers, they learn that the hard way when they go into commercial baking and then they realize, oh, I can't spend 45 minutes decorating this cake. I have to learn to be quicker and I have to know what my limit is on how fancy I can. For me, I really like being able to bake at home because I hyper fixate on like the decoration to the point where I'll spend like 15 minutes decorating one cookie. And so if I get like a cookie order and I'm making really cool decorated cookies, I will spend so much time on it with these intricate designs that it's almost too much. And I try to
back off a little
I try to remember, okay, make sure it tastes good. The art part comes second. Like you can still make things look pretty and not give your back like premature hunching from it.
So for beginner bakers, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they start baking?
I think a lot of people are intimidated by food scales. I've seen it in some comments and people are recommending, hey, why don't you start weighing your ingredients? And I've seen, oh no, food scales intimidate me. I think getting over the fear of a food scale, weighing your ingredients is so impactful because it helps you stay consistent. If you want to make something one time, fine, use your cup measurements. That's really what helps you. But I think if you want to really make something signature or something that you want to continue baking, getting a food scale will help you stay consistent. It'll help you know if you're missing an ingredient, if you know how much something is supposed to weigh, and then you weigh it and you're like, oh, I forgot XYZ. That definitely helps too. I think another thing that beginner bakers don't realize is there's more to baking than baking. There's costing, there's sourcing. And I think these things are important if it's something you want to take further than just hobby baking. Even if you want to just bake at home as a career, it's important to understand how to cost food, how to carefully source, how to know a market. There's all these factors in baking. I think when I was working as a pastry chef, I know half of the time I was baking, but the other half I was developing recipes. I was helping my assistant. I was overseeing and costing. I think there's just more to baking than baking.
There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff.
They compare themselves to things that they see in stores, things they see from advanced bakers, and like you just have to practice. Like I look back at my friend and I were sending each other pictures of our first cookies and our first cakes, and it's embarrassing, but it's funny. We all start somewhere, and I think beginner bakers need to not be so hard on themselves. Everything you do is a learning experience. Even I'm learning.
In the commercial bakery I worked in, there was a steam, like you could pump steam into the oven. Like you can't do that. They probably do sell them, but I don't own one.
Exactly.
So
and like water bath at the bottom of the
research on how to maximize the amount of steam I could put in my home oven to make sure that it gave it that.
Yeah.
So it would keep rising.
Right. It's not exactly the same, but it's great.
Yes.
And that's what matters.
It's like finding this, okay, this is what they're doing. Can I do something similar at home that will give me a product that's semi like that? But yeah, I don't have an oven with fire inside of it.
Yeah, equipment makes a huge difference. A lot of homemakers don't have the KitchenAid. So they're wondering why aren't my my cake's coming out the way that they should. Why aren't they so fluffy? And you're not using a KitchenAid, or a Bosch mixer or something. And it's not your fault. You don't have one. You're doing the best you can with what you got.
Exactly. And to mix something for 7 to 8 minutes by hand, you're not going to be doing that for very long.
Exactly.
That's definitely an investment.
Do you have a bigger mixer to knead your bread, or do you need
I have
by
a KitchenAid.
hand? Okay.
I don't need by hand. There are certain recipes that I use where you fold it.
Yeah.
So it never does go into a mixer.
Yeah, like
I basically have it in this like really large tub.
Yep, and then you do your folds.
And then do the folds inside of it.
I love the feeling of the stretch and the fold.
Yeah, and it setting like a timer and intervals going in and folding it. And that's where the feel comes in, because a KitchenAid won't give you the feel. But if you use your hands... And like I would recommend beginner bakers like use their hands for 100%. As much as they can.
Yes.
Like the KitchenAid needs to be used, but if you don't touch the dough, then you're not going to understand what it feels like when it's...
Same with laminating, sheeting, making croissants. I think if you're going to start laminating by hand before you start using a sheeter, before you go to a bakery and work at a bakery, use a sheeter, or buy a sheeter if you have the money, learning to laminate by hand really helps you understand how the process works, what it should look like, what it should feel like. So I totally get that.
I've laminated things at home. Like I did croissants before at home. And so
it's intense.
It's very intense. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but Pano chocolate.
Pano chocolate? Yeah.
I see. I wouldn't have been embarrassed if I wasn't sitting across to somebody that speaks French.
That's a fun one to make at home.
My family was very impressed. I call them showstoppers. What's a baking skill or technique that took you a long time to master?
Definitely making macarons. There's a whole process with making macarons where you have to whip up your egg whites to stiff peaks. It's called macaronage, where you're mixing your egg whites into you're immersing into your batter and then getting it at the right consistency and then piping them. I had the advantage of making hundreds of shells a day, so I got better at it quickly. But it's a real hard thing to learn, and it's definitely one of those things like you have to practice over and over again. Macarons are very temperamental, so if you have the tiniest speck of fat in your mixing bowl, or you overmix or undermix your batter, all the shells will not work out. So learning how to troubleshoot just by watching and work on the fly, that technique, that's definitely a hard one. But
I've never made those before. They intimidate me.
A lot of people are intimidated, or they make a couple batches. They're like, I can't do this. But practice. But it's easier said than done. Again, I think I was lucky with the experience that I had.
What does baking mean to you beyond the process?
For me, I think it's bringing joy to people, bringing something to them that they can share with other people, to give them something to brighten up their day. I used to say that when I was working at a bakery, it was like, someone would come in and buy one of my desserts, take a bite, have that moment of happiness, and then maybe it would lift up their mood, and then they would hold the door open for the next person, and then that person would do something nice for someone else. I just think these things have the butterfly effect. Is that what it is?
Yeah, exactly.
I like making things that bring people joy, or just even moments of joy. Life isn't always happy, and I think if you can find tiny moments of joy in your life, that's really what makes it worth it. And so if I can give someone a tiny moment of chocolate joy, I love to be a part of that.
Yeah, I definitely feel that's the case.
Food is love.
It is. And I'm a big connection person, and communication's my background, but I feel like baking's given me beyond the process, has given me so many great conversations. Yes. Too, and just like connections with people, and just sitting here talking with you about baking, like I love it.
Yeah.
I feel just more connected to the world because of baking.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of things that I think are nostalgic for people, and so bringing back that nostalgia for them also. My mom, she's going through her own cancer journey right now, and something that she's been wanting me to make are thumbprint cookies for her. And it just, making these thumbprint cookies for her, it's nostalgic, it just makes her happy, and watching her face light up, even though she's going through this horrible, hard experience, that moment of like her face lighting up and she's, oh my God, thank you so much. I love these cookies. That's what I do it for. I don't do it for the compliments. I don't do it because I want to be like, oh, I'm the best baker. I just want to make people happy. Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. Baking made me happy, so I want to share that.
Is there a cultural connection for you with baking?
Definitely cultural. So I am half Korean.
Okay.
And I've definitely been trying to explore different types of ingredients and recipes, not just from Korea, but also just from Asia in general. The other part of the world that I guess I don't really have a lot of experience in. I'm very fascinated in Japanese pastry and how like French baking had impacted or influenced that and how they made it their own. I think Japanese baking is amazing.
What are like examples of Japanese baking?
Japanese baking, the desserts in general are a lot lighter,
Okay.
fluffier. They use things like matcha,
Okay.
ube, and so like to see like a Japanese cheesecake isn't dense and rich like the one that we have here. It's like light and fluffy and almost like airy, and just the differences in that I think it's really fascinating, and trying to incorporate some of that into my baking so people can experience other cultures. And then also, like when it comes to Korean baking, trying to go back and learn traditional recipes and learn more about them, and not just try to make them, but read about the history. That's something I've started to get into more.
What are some traditional recipes in Korean?
Korean bakers, they use a lot of rice powder, and there's like sweet dumplings type things.
Okay.
It's definitely something that I'm trying to learn more about, but not get into yet because I want to understand the history.
Yeah.
And so I haven't experimented much with them, but it's something that more I'm trying to read about. And then I get into rabbit holes. Like I'll start reading about this pastry, and then I'll start reading about this event in history. And because
you take deep dives,
Yeah, exactly.
and I appreciate that.
So then I sit down and I'm like, oh, I'm going to look at this recipe for these like sweet rice things. And then all of a sudden I'm reading about the history of Korea in the 1800s. But it's cool. I'm trying to learn more about myself through the culture that I'm a part of.
We've all failed in baking. What role does failure play in baking for you? And you can connect it to life too, or you can just keep it to baking.
Yeah, no. For me personally, it's about paying attention, being mindful, right? When I'm at my best and I'm baking, I'm really trying to think about, and it sounds, I guess, like new agey, but I really do try to think about, okay, like this wheat, where did the wheat come from? How did it grow? And like these ingredients that we use, like picking up local produce, like appreciating, hey, this came from a local farm and it like tastes great, and really just being mindful of what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Other times I'm baking and my mind is on another planet. And then I pull my cake out of the oven and this looks wrong. What did I forget? And then I look at it more and I'm like, I forgot sugar. I think for me, when I fail at baking, it's a good reminder, stay present, stay mindful. Other things that you're worrying about or thinking about, they don't necessarily have to be on your mind right now. Focus on what you're doing. And also, don't beat yourself up when you fail. My best friend and I will text each other all the time. Hey, I messed up. Guess what I did? And it just becomes something where you can laugh at yourself. And nobody's perfect. I think there's a lot of pressure in baking to be perfect, to get things perfect. That's not how life is, and that's not how baking is.
Exactly.
I've also had a lot of fun with my mistakes. If I mess up on something and it doesn't turn out exactly the way I wanted it to, well, it turned into something else. And it's still good. It still gets eaten.
I think there's a lot of beginning bakers who've turned a lot of loaves of bread into croutons.
Yeah, exactly. Croutons are great.
Croutons are.
Failure isn't always a bad thing.
No. Touching on the mindfulness part, though, I believe for me, depression, anxiety, baking has helped me tremendously, and the mindfulness of it.
Oh, yeah.
And what I found is it not only helps me mentally, but I can tell that my baked goods turned out better when I am fully present in the kitchen and I'm not thinking about things that happened in the past or the future. Like when I'm just there doing those things. So I'm glad you touched on those elements and the mind part of it.
It is important. And I would like to teach some classes, I think. And I would love to, again, I would love to just teach in general, teach baking in general, but I would love to teach a class on being mindful with food and working with food. I think it's important to look at it that way too.
I love how you like branched out and we're talking about, I think about that too, because I buy King Arthur flowers. Awesome.
Oh, yeah, King Arthur or nothing, but
I wanted to get a King Arthur tattoo.
It's so funny is I also have thought about getting a King Arthur tattoo. Diehard King Arthur. It's consistent, right? The protein is always the same. Big King Arthur fan. Love what they do, how they treat their employees. But also, I think it's nice to, if you need something like a spelt flour or some buckwheat or something, branching out and try to hit a little local, mill or something that's a little different. But I'm with you on the King Arthur. That's another thing for beginner bakers. King Arthur. You won't regret it.
When the catalog comes, kid on Christmas Day, I'm so excited when the King Arthur catalog comes.
Yeah. My husband always grabs the mail for us, and I wait for that day that the King Arthur catalog is sitting on the table. Oh, it's kid on Christmas. Oh, the catalog is here. And some of the stuff I think we don't need, like the pre-mixes, but some of the equipment, some of the recipes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And some of it's
Favorite.
fun.
It is
like,
fun. Yeah.
I have a hat that just says bake
I
on
did too.
it.
I should have wore our bake hat.
So you can buy some of the fun stuff
yeah.
too. If you couldn't bake anymore, what do you think you'd miss the most out of it?
I think the connection with people, definitely. That someone reaching out saying, hey, I have this thing or celebration, or my loved one, it's their birthday and I want to make something for them. Being a part of that, and that making connections with people who come back for recipes or come back to order more things. That's, I think, what I would miss the most. I think I'm a natural introvert at heart, and baking helps pull me out of that a little bit.
How do you think baking brings people together?
I think it's an equalizer, right? Say you're at a family gathering with all different opinions and age groups and situations, and then someone brings out a plate of cookies. Most of the people there are just going to be like, oh my God, this cookie's great. Look at this cookie, or look at this cake. Oh my gosh. And then
We can all agree upon some, but these cookies are good.
Right. It just calms the mood down, realizes people. Also, I think it's one of those things where people can just share moments together. That decompression, right? Like at a birthday party or a celebration, when the cake comes out, everyone just calms down and they're just like, yeah, I'm enjoying this sugar and this treat. I was very lucky. I got to make a birthday cake for somebody who works in an important role at the farmer's market. And that connection of that person who ended up going to their birthday party with other people that I knew from different parts of my life, and knowing that all these people came together to celebrate this one person, and I got to make the birthday cake with the produce from the farmer's market. That was just, that brings people together. And it was just so cool. I'll never forget that.
It sounds like through this conversation too, it sounds like you've developed a lot of relationships that like center on baking too, like different conversations.
Yeah, I definitely have.
There. So that's great to hear. Are there any challenges you faced as a baker in today's food industry? I know on our walk here, you talked about the cottage law a little bit. And
cottage law definitely is restrictive, and that's why I don't want to stay a cottage bakery forever. Not being able to offer things like custards and curds, things that I love to make, it's definitely a little discouraging. But at the same time, as someone who understands, I 100% understand why these things exist. Also, the cost of ingredients, especially right now, right, with the cost of eggs and butter and chocolate. But I think it definitely it brings you to think about what's important to you. For me, it's still really important that I give people wholesome ingredients. I don't cut corners. I still make things from scratch, like graham crackers, or if I need oat flour, I'll make my own oat flour, things like that. And so when it comes to sourcing, I'm going to buy like Callebaut, Couverture chocolate. I'm not going to buy Toll House chocolate chips. That's just what it is. And if I have to charge a little more, then I definitely will communicate that to people like, hey, food costs are rising, but I'm going to keep my products the same. So this is why. But for the most part, I think it's just about staying true to who you are, but also being mindful of food costs.
Trying to lower the costs where you can, but also not using ingredients that are not representative of who you are as a baker.
I don't want my integrity to suffer just because of financial strain. I'd rather just not make that product at all and then offer it at a later time if I have to sacrifice too much on the ingredients. And I'm okay with that. I think everyone understands right now that the cost of things are rough, and it's also the connections, right? Like I have a friend who has his own organic chickens, and I have eggs from him if I really need them. And that I think being grateful for the resources that you have, and we do a little treat sometimes. I bake for him and gives me eggs.
Oh, that's nice. I think
you got to help each other.
Bread is interesting because buy a loaf of bread for 99 cents. Right. So when you're charging $10 or $11 for a loaf of bread, there's a large disparity there.
Yes.
The flour's more substantial. It's actually bread's actually has nutritional value.
Yeah, and depending on how long you ferment as well, it's good for your gut health. And then you have simple ingredients: flour, water, yeast, sometimes eggs, sometimes milk. But for the most part, it's wholesome ingredients. If you go look at ingredient lists on grocery store bread, it's a mile long. Some people, that's all they can afford. And I think, that is what it is. And I understand. I definitely have been there. I sometimes can't always afford it. Not a loaf of bread.
Big flour on sale. I'm buying it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Costco membership.
Exactly.
It's important that if people do ask about your pricing, and you just need to explain why. And then there's ways to make bread affordable, smaller loaves, deals, or whatever. There's a way to make bread approachable for everybody, but of course it is hard.
Yeah.
It's a struggle for everyone.
It's like you have to make your choices where you're at.
Exactly.
What do you think is the most exciting trend in baking right now?
I'm just going to be really honest. I am not like super big on trends. I never have been. I've never been a big Instagram person. I just started an Instagram for my business, and trying to navigate that, I felt like a 90-year-old. But I noticed that like vintage cakes and vintage that Lambeth decoration is really trendy right now. And I think it's ridiculous, but it's also ridiculously fun to make. So I never say no to a cake like that. I think it's so fun. It's crazy. And I've also noticed that because of, I don't know if you've heard of School of Chocolate with that chef Guichon. He like,
Is it on Netflix?
yeah,
Okay,
it's like the like crazy chocolate thing. I think that people are really trying to get into chocolate decoration and hyper-realistic cake.
Is it cake?
Yeah, is it cake? I have dabbled in it. I can definitely make an apple out of modeling chocolate and cake that looks like a real apple, for sure. Like I do have some artistic background, so I can like paint and stuff. But then there's that part of me this is so wasteful. Does it taste good? Nobody really wants to eat fondant. Modeling chocolate is a weird texture. This is it cake thing. It's really just people showing off like, hey, I can make art. And you couldn't do it, and it's cake.
More of an Instagram-y
it is.
trend.
I feel food waste is so important to me that it's hard for me to want to immerse myself in these trends on a big scale, just because I get pulled in that direction of I don't want to be wasteful.
I've watched a lot of baking shows, and it seems like a lot of those hyper-realism ones, like on the inside of it, it might be like one piece of cake, but the rest of it is like crispy treat.
Right, like fondant covered crispy treat. Who's eating that? Nobody's eating that, and then you're just wasting.
Have you ever collaborated with other bakers, and how does that influence your work?
I have when I was working for other bakeries. Right now, I'm not physically collaborating with other bakers, but I do have a friend. She has a cottage bakery down in Illinois, and again, like my best friend I mentioned, she's the pastry manager at the former place I worked at. So we are always talking, either my friend in Illinois or my friend here. We're constantly saying, hey, I'm going to try this recipe and bring it to you. Or, hey, if I do this, like, what should I add? Or what would you do? It's like that type of collaboration. But then there's also people that I'm in talks with about doing pop-ups and things.
Okay, that's fun.
Like TBD. Yeah. I would love to do pop-ups with, I have some chef friends, a lot of chef friends. So I'd love to do like a food and dessert pop-up, and that's where it's heading.
Oh, that's really fun. What advice would you give to someone who wants to become a baker?
Yes, practice. No matter what it is, whether it's bread, make 100 loaves. Get some practice dough. Make practice dough, which is like fake dough, and practice. If you're going to be decorating, make some buttercream out of shortening that you're not going to eat, and just pipe on plastic piping boards. Like, practice everything, because that's how you'll get better. If you're developing recipes or you're trying to do things, don't worry too much about finding a recipe online and trying to replicate it perfectly. Get to the roots of things and then make adjustments and be intuitive and practice. Yeah. Did I say that? Did I mention practice?
You did mention practice. What's the weirdest or most unexpected ingredient you've used in baking?
Squid ink.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when it comes to making things black, like you don't want to use a lot of black food coloring. I'm of the belief that a little bit of food coloring is okay. Our bodies know how to process things, but I don't want to use too much. I prefer to use like a mix of natural food coloring and artificial.
Okay.
When it comes to black, obviously you want to use as much natural as you can.
Does it add a flavor though, or is it?
No, squid ink adds like no flavor.
Okay.
It's so weird. I use squid ink making milk bread.
Okay.
And I've used charcoal in baguettes for the most part. Like if I'm going to do like a black buttercream, I'll do a lot of black cocoa powder and then a little bit of black food coloring. But yeah, squid ink. Ink. You wouldn't think. It doesn't taste like fish. It doesn't taste cuttlefish. Ink does not taste like any type of fish at all. You wouldn't even know. Chefs use it in pasta all the time.
Okay. I think I've seen that before, but I didn't know if I added a flavor.
You should try some squid ink in your bread.
Where do you buy it?
Oh, you can buy it at some like Asian specialty markets, or you can order it online.
Okay.
It's weird because when you're like taking your dough, especially if you're doing one of the doughs you fold and it's like black and gooey and you're folding it, it's just weird. It's fun. Yeah.
That sounds fun. I need to try that. What's one baking myth you wish people would stop believing?
I guess that you have to have a natural born talent to be a baker, or that you have to go to culinary school. You have to be taught prestigious things and you have to reach for the top. Like, anybody can bake. It's just like in Ratatouille.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
I love Ratatouille. Like, that's one of my favorites.
Me too. Yeah.
I love
Anybody can cook. Anybody can bake.
Oh, I love that.
I think going to culinary school has amazing advantages, and I definitely recommend it. But do you have to? Not at all. Do you need all the fancy gadgets? Not at all. You need your hands. You need some flour, some water.
Yeah.
That's really it.
Yeah. If your baking style had a theme song, what would it be?
Probably the 90s Sailor Moon theme song.
Okay.
Okay, so in the lyrics, it's fighting evil by moonlight, winning love by daylight. Like, I feel like that's how I feel, where I'm at night and I'm like baking at midnight and I'm like rushing around the kitchen and I'm like, it's intense, it's hard work. And then in the day, I'm like, here's your cake and here's your cookies. Like, everything is great. And I'm like, but at night, I just turn into this, I don't know, I have a martial arts background.
Okay.
So I feel like I just get into this like intense focus mode. It's almost like a fight where you're turning and you're moving and you're throwing bowls and spatulas. So yeah, I totally feel like it'd be like this, like the Sailor Moon theme song from the 90s.
Nice. Finally, where can people find your work, and do you have anything exciting that you would like the audience to know about?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram right now at Lune Specialty Desserts. Hindsight, I feel like specialty was a word I shouldn't have included. Even I have trouble spelling it. But if you look up Lune Desserts, it'll pop up. Right now, I have things on the back burner just because my mom's cancer journey is more important to me
Absolutely.
than my business. And I don't mean to say my business is not important, but my mom is living with me right now and I'm her primary caretaker and she means so much to me that I don't want her care to suffer. Working on small projects behind the scenes. I have a wedding that I'm catering coming up.
That's exciting.
I do cakes for friends here and there, but for the most part, I'm on hiatus, but I'm coming back. I'm not gone. And
we're excited to see what you come up with.
Look for pop-ups, look for collaborations. I plan to be involved with Littlefoot Coffee. Shout out to Littlefoot. I love them. I love what they do. I only exclusively use Littlefoot in my stuff, and I always have. Would love to be involved with them more. And so I think you'll start seeing me around the community, collaborating with other people, doing pop-ups at places that mean a lot to me. So I hope just to meet people around. I'm not trying to become like the biggest name in baking or compete with anybody, but I do think I have.
I love your collaborative spirit.
I think the baking community, we need to lift each other up for sure, not bring each other down or compete with each other. I'm all about helping out.
Working together. Thank you for coming on Crust Issues. It was amazing having you on, and you're so fascinating, and you have a fascinating story to tell.
If you ever wanted to collab, I'm down.
I definitely will connect with you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.